Hi, I'm Donna Wells from CDHA. This question and answer session is about addressing workplace concerns with infection control practices and is part of the video series, Conversations to Build Collaborative Workplaces, produced by CDHA to assist dental hygienists in having positive conversations with employers as they return to work post-COVID and in the future. If you haven't watched the introductory video, Developing Your Mindset, it would be a good idea to do so as it will help you better understand the frameworks that will be discussed. It's important to remember that registered dental hygienists are required to follow the infection prevention and control guidelines set by their provincial regulatory body. Don't put your own health, your client's health, your registration, and your professional liability insurance at risk by choosing to work in an office with substandard infection prevention and control protocols. At this time, I'd like to introduce you to Catherine Eitel-Belt, a communication expert in the dental profession. Thank you so much for joining us, Catherine. Many of our members are concerned about infection control protocols. How would they start a conversation, either with their employer or their coworker, to address their concerns?
Well, first of all, you're exactly right that a really great leader in our profession, in the profession of dental hygiene, would not shove their frustrations or their concerns or their fears down and ignore it. They would step forward and they would responsibly and maturely have the conversation and try to affect a positive change. So I think these are two different conversations, Donna, if I could. I would love to take the first one, which would be if the issue is with the employer and the decisions that the employer is making or not making, versus they've made the decisions you agree with, but a coworker of yours is not adhering to them. I think those are different scenarios. And so if it's okay, I'd love to take those differently. Yeah. So you want to start with the employer. If that's where the disconnect is, you will absolutely want to apply the ARCH formula. And what you'll remember if you've watched that video is that I'm going to sit down with my dentist and I'm going to say, thank you so much for giving me some time to talk about something that's been on my mind. I'm going to set the context. I'm going to say I'd like to talk about how we approach infection control. So be careful here that you don't say, I want to talk about the concerns I have that we are not upholding the standards and we are not, it sounds very accusatory and very right and wrong. That's very different than what I said. What I said was, I'd like to talk to you about what our systems are for sterilization and how we could, be on the same page about that or something along those lines. So it's very positive and it's very non-threatening. I'm assuming we're going to find an answer, and I feel good about my ability to do that. So it comes through. I'm not coming in angry, I guess, or resentful or bitter or anything like that. So I'll set the context, and then assuming they say, yeah, this is a good time, what's on your mind? Then I would say, well, I want to talk about exactly what the standards are. I want to make sure I understand what the protocols are, and I want to make sure that I make a good decision for me in terms of how I feel about whether it's safe for me to continue to work here or not, based on what your standards will be. So I guess I'd first like to start with how are you feeling about our protocols? Are you feeling that they're well structured? Do you feel they're adhering to all the guidelines that we need to be meeting? Do you think we're doing a good job there? What's your understanding of this? What's your perspective? So the goal here is to check in with the dentist and find out how are they feeling, because it's a very different response from me, the dental hygienist. If that dentist says, I know we're not doing it right, and I feel bad about it, and it actually bothers me, but I don't know what else to do because I don't have the money to pay for what they say we need. Now, I might respond very differently to that than if they said, I think what we're doing is just fine. I think all the rest of that's a bunch of hokey, and I don't even think it's that necessary. You see? So those are very different perspectives. And you can see now, Donna, why it's so important before you start with what you are bringing and what you want to say, that you check in to see what is their perspective. And just notice how many times when you get good at this, that inside you say, I'm so glad I did this, because I wouldn't have guessed that that was their perspective. I thought it was different. And I was all ready to do battle when in fact I realized now I don't need to do at least not that battle. I don't need to do it. So check in. You'll be surprised more often than you're not that there was a piece you didn't understand. Really good communicators don't skip this part. So check in, listen, have really good body language. Meaning I'm open, my arms are open, I'm leaning into the conversation, I have good eye contact, I'm not thinking about my response, I'm really listening. And listening means I hear something, but I'm not exactly sure I understand the meaning or that I'm interpreting it right, so I ask questions. I keep asking questions until I go, I've got it. I think I clearly understand their perspective. So it could happen right away. They could say their perspective and you'd go, got it. Other times they'll say it and you'll think, I'm not sure I still understand. Are we doing it or are we not doing it? So make sure that you probe with some questions until you get that clarity. Once you have the clarity, now arch begins. So now let's say that the dentist's response was, yeah, I mean, I know that we're not doing everything that's been recommended. I feel badly about it, but I just don't know how to pay for it. I don't feel like I can afford to do all of this. My A in arch might sound like, you know what, I completely understand that. I can only imagine the expenses that you've had with us being closed for as long as we have, with all of the things that we're having to do to get back to work. I can only imagine the burden of that. And I just want you to know that I understand. And be sure there's an and here, not a but. And would it be fair to say that given your answer, that if we could find a way to either raise the practice productivity so that you could afford it, or find a way to find less expensive supplies, or some combination of the two, and this would make better business sense for you, you do want to do it. Am I understanding that right? That you want to do it as long as we can somehow figure out the finances of it. If their answer is yes, then now you have a place of agreement. Let's say they can't find supplies. They want to do it, but they can't find it. Again, so then would it be fair to say, if we could find them, if there were ways that we could figure this out, then you do want to implement these changes. If we take the objection or concern around, I think it's overkill. I don't think we need all these. I'll just step out, Donna, for just a second and say, when you come into this as a hygienist, you have to know what your line is. Yeah, in other words, you have to know what the minimum is that would need to occur for you to feel safe to continue to work there. And one of the things I want to encourage your hygienists to consider is, if you want to stand in the most empowered professional space, you won't hold anyone responsible for your choices and your decisions. Meaning you won't be angry, you won't be bitter about the fact that you disagree on what is necessary. You're going into this conversation not to judge and not to force and not to threaten. You're going in to say, I just need to get clarity on what's going to happen here. And getting clarity will help me decide what to do in the best interest of me, my patients, and my family. So that it doesn't come across as a threat, and it also keeps you from sort of falling into this idea that they're responsible for your future and for your decisions, because they're not. So it sounds a little heavy at first, but it's really freeing when we know that our decisions are what enable us to be empowered and to step into our own power. And so don't hold anyone responsible. Just go in for clarity, go in to offer solutions, but you do have to go in knowing that what's your minimum in terms of you feeling good about and safe to work there. So So if it is, I think it's overblown, then I might say, I can totally understand. I don't necessarily agree with it. You don't have to agree with someone else's opinion to understand it. So I would say that. I would say I understand that it could feel like it's overkill. I believe there is a fair amount, a sizable amount of research to show us that it is necessary and that it is the right protocol. Are you open at all to some of the research that I've been reading that I think comes from legitimate, respectable sources that might, expand your understanding of it or might change how you're viewing it? Would you be open to me sharing some of that research and some of that science, and have a discussion about it? If they say yes, then now you've got an end to, you've got a resource to share. If they say no, I'm not interested, then I think to say, okay, well, I just want to thank you. I want you to thank you for being honest. I want to thank you for having the courage to hold the line that you think is best. And I appreciate getting clarity so that I can go back and make a decision that it will be best for me. And so, what you either may know it then, or you may need to think about and come back. So that's that. That's a long explanation for that A part, but that's so important to get there. And we've kind of naturally moved into the R. The R is the resolution. The R is making a request. Could I send you some science that I've been reading that I think might expand your understanding of it? Or could I help you source these materials? Could I help with finding a way to help financially pay for some of these? That kind of thing. So, it would be easy to sit here, Donna, and say, we shouldn't have to do this. We should be able to come and be protected, and that's not our concern about how it's afforded or what, that's theirs. And all of that's probably technically true. What we need in the world are people who are willing to come into the conversation and say, maybe it shouldn't be this way, but how do I be an advocate for positive change? How do I contribute to the roadblock and to the dead end? How do I contribute that? How do I raise the level of how all other professions think of dental hygienists and dental hygiene and our ability to be collaborative in these conversations? Once you've reached the resolution in R, then it's pretty easy to move into C. Please don't skip it. The C in ARCH is to reconfirm who's going to do what. What have we agreed to? Who's going to do what and by when? So I would just say, Dr. Smith, if I heard this right, I'm going to get the research. I'm going to provide that to you by the end of the week. Would it be fair to say you could take a look at that by Wednesday? Maybe I could put a little time on our calendar and we could talk about what are your thoughts after having read the articles that I send, or whatever it is. But it's often the other party will shake their head yes, but there's still a vagueness around the specifics. And that's where we see a lot of breakdown. So don't let there be any vagueness. Who's going to send it? When are they going to read it? When are you going to come back together to discuss it? Who's going to do what? Be sure you reconfirm. And then lastly, leave it on some hope. The H stands for hope. So I would say, no matter how the conversation went, I would say, Doctor, I just really want you to know how much I appreciate your willingness to sit and have this conversation with me and to explore it a little bit, especially if the conversation was difficult. I might say, I know this wasn't easy, but you stuck in there and you stayed in it with me, and I really do appreciate it. And if you did reach a resolution, then I would say I'm really optimistic about the plan we came up with. I feel much better. I feel optimistic, and even if it's not completed, I feel really good that we'll come back together and we'll have this conversation again, and we'll just keep it moving forward. And I feel really encouraged about that. So that hope is, how do I show some gratitude, and how do I put some positive spin on the future, some optimism for the future? So that's the structure for the framework.
Catherine, can I ask you one more question about addressing this concern with your employer? Let's say that the employer asks the dental hygienist if they are saying that they wouldn't return to work if some changes are not made to infection control protocols. So maybe you could answer that question, and then we can move on to the conversation with the coworker.
Sure. So basically the question is, are you threatening me?
Mm.
Are you laying down an ultimatum and saying that if I don't make these changes, you're not going to continue to work here? And I think, Donna, that could come in a couple of different ways. It could also come in, well, this is what I'm going to do. So you're going to have to decide if it's good enough for you, because I'm not changing it. It's going to be this. So if you can't live with it, then you don't work here. It could come, the ultimatum could come from either direction. I would keep my cool. I would know in my heart that wasn't my intention. It wasn't my intention to threaten or to judge. It is my intention to get clarity about the conditions in which I will be working, and to make a decision based on that clarity about what's good for me and my family and my patients. And so I'll just keep reiterating that to my employer. I'll say, I in no way am trying to threaten or give you an ultimatum. I am trying to get clarity about what the protocols will be going forward, and what you're basing those on, and then do some thinking about how comfortable I will be in continuing to work here and represent your practice, and still feel safe to do so. So I think it's important for us to say, I completely respect, this is your practice, this is your decision, this is you're the one who has to decide how you want things to be here. And I 100% respect that. And I would just ask that you would respect that I need to make a decision once I understand what that is, about whether this would be appropriate for me. I mean, I'm positive you don't want someone working for you that doesn't feel 100%, terrific about being here. So I just, and that's where I want to work too. Is so if if we can continue to talk this through and to work on getting to a place that we can both feel comfortable, I would really like that. If you feel that you've been clear and this is what it is, then I just have a decision to make, and I absolutely will give you all the notice that I can about my decision. And then you'll just have to ask, I'm going to need a week, I'm going to need a day. I already know now, whatever that is. And you do have to know. You do have to know, or go and decide. If they say, yeah, no more discussion, this is what it is, take it or leave it. I think then you have lots of choices. I mean, there may be some instances where it makes sense to report someone. That's of course what we're hoping to avoid. It's pretty hard to stay in a productive relationship when we're so at odds that we're reporting people to authorities. So I think, of course, we're hoping to avoid those drastic measures and reach some resolution. But no one forces us to work in a place that we just don't feel comfortable and don't feel safe. So I do think you have to know what your line is. Did that answer your question adequately?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really liked that you used the term "and" versus "but" in that response. And I think you referenced that earlier. And I think that was really important part of that particular component.
Well, it's a really good point, because in all the things in all of these videos we're doing together on these challenging conversations, it's rare that "but" is the best choice to connect two thoughts. Because what you saw was, I understand this about your position. And then there's this other position that I have, and they're a little bit at odds. And so to connect those with "but" basically erases what you said about the first one.
Right.
But if you connect them with "and," it pulls them together. It says, I understand this, and I have in addition, there's this. There's your perspective, and in addition, there's my perspective. Rather than saying, well, there's your perspective, but then there's mine that's really right. And
right.
So it erases this. It erases that this is even legitimate. And so remember, you can understand and not agree. And that's what we're trying to communicate. I understand this is your choice. It's not my choice to make. My choice is to decide where I feel comfortable working, and they don't get to make that choice for you, and you don't get to make that choice for the practice. You're just trying to get clarity and be of service and getting everybody to a place they feel comfortable. That's a very different, very mature, very high level professional communication position. And so that's, I think, what we're trying to encourage with these videos, is that understanding.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
All right, now if you can address how the dental hygienist would have that conversation with a coworker.
Yeah, so a little different in that with the employer, they're going to be making some actual decisions. They have authority to do that, whereas the coworker doesn't. So the one thing I would do prior to that conversation is make sure that you're clear and certain what the protocols are from the owner's or management perspective about infection control, because you want to make sure that your understanding of the protocols is the correct one and it is not being followed. So I would make sure that you're clear that it isn't what you want, it's what the practice is. It's the agreement of the practice, and it's the agreement around the system within the practice that anyone who works here would follow these protocols. So make sure that you're clear about that. Then I would go to the coworker and I would still use Arch. I would say, you know, do you have a couple of minutes? I wondered if we could talk about how we're both managing our infection control protocols. I'd love to chat with you a little bit about that. I have some thoughts about it. You try saying, I have some thoughts, I have some ideas, I have some things I'd like to discuss, rather than saying, because I don't think it's working and I think you really need to be re-educated, you know, or whatever. It's just so much more judgmental to say. So just come in a neutral, shift into neutral. And if they say, sure, I've got a few minutes, then to say, great, thank you so much. How do you think it's going? Do you think that we're operating on the same page? Do you feel clear about the protocols? Do you feel good about how, you know, what we're doing, and in particular how you're, you know, what the protocols that you're following, and see what they say. It's the same thing. Let's get their perspective. You may hear a vast variety of responses. If someone says, I knew you were going to talk to me about this. I know that I haven't been doing it. I just don't feel like I have the time. I want to do it, but I just don't feel like I have enough time between patients to even get it done. And I know I'm dropping the ball a little bit. That's a very different perspective to address. And I can be very helpful with time management ideas and shadowing and all kinds of things that we could contribute there, versus someone going, I don't know what you're talking about. I think I do it excellently. I don't even know what you're talking about. And they have a complete disconnect from what you're saying. So again, there's a broad variety of responses, but figure out up front, not later, up front, what are you dealing with? Is it a lack of compliance? Is it passive aggressive? Is it a lack of information? What is it? What is it? So Donna, then I would just, once I'd established their perspective, then I would start with Arch again to say, you know, I appreciate you taking the time. One of the things I most appreciate about you is how thorough you are in tray setup and in, you know, find some things, make sure they're true. I want to say that right here. Make sure they're true. Anything you're affirming or appreciating, don't make something up. People can see through that. So find something true that you really do admire. They take, you know, they're very thorough in their clinical notes, or they're very great at tray setup, or they're amazing in the depth of their knowledge in a couple of procedures, or whatever it is. They're always on time. They're a great teammate in other ways. So compliment them. No but here. So I appreciate this about you. And I want to talk about how do we take that same level of excellence and apply it to the infection control protocols that we're all working toward. It feels like there's a little bit of a disconnect between what I understand to be the standards and what is actually happening. And so I wondered if we could talk about a couple of ideas that I have around how we could get in sync and how we could both feel good that we're keeping the same standard and holding to the same standard. So could I suggest some ideas? And then you just have to have some ideas. You have to have some ideas about how you could get in sync, or explore why they aren't. Is it a lack of education? Is it a lack of understanding? Is it a lack of time? What is it? So that we can bring some ideas. I will say right here, Donna, sometimes we don't know how to solve it. So sometimes we're like, well, I'd like to bring some ideas, but I don't really know how they're going to solve it. I think it's okay to say, do you have some ideas? Is there something that you're thinking about? If neither one of you do, then I would suggest a third party. I would say, would you be willing? I don't know what to do about it either. So would you be willing to reach out to you know, another office that might be experiencing this, see what they're doing, reach out to our professional associations and see what they've been recommending, or if they've heard some similar frustrations? Could we bring in our, another, maybe our office manager or our dentist or another coach? I don't do infection control protocol coaching, but there are lots of coaches that do. And they've probably run across a similar frustration or a similar, roadblock. So there's lots of places to bring in some third-party information to help you with ideas. But assuming you find an idea, then the same thing is true. You're going to reconfirm who's going to do what and by when, and you're going to leave this on a feeling of hope and optimism and gratitude. So I wanted to separate that this conversation is being had with someone who doesn't have authority to decide the protocols. They do have authority to decide if they're going to keep those protocols or not. And that's really what you're discussing. It's slightly different in that with the dentist, it's am I understanding what the protocols are? And if the protocols aren't to your liking, then or our adherence to them isn't to your liking, can I affect that? Can I positively affect that? Versus this is unclear about it and you're not doing it, and how can I help to bridge that gap? So the process is the same, but I think the starting place is a little bit different.
Okay. How about if the dental hygienist with the coworker having the conversation, you had mentioned earlier, if the coworker does not see a problem, is resistant to any form of change, even if they're aware they're not following infection control protocols, how would the dental hygienist address that?
Well, I think, again, you don't want to threaten, but you want to be clear to say, then I just want you to know I appreciate your position. I understand your position. I don't agree with it. I do, and I don't believe that is the protocol that the office has formed an agreement around. So, there's a remote chance that I could be wrong about that, but let's do this. Why don't we do this? Why don't we, if, with your permission, I would like to bring our manager in, I'd like to bring our dentist in, and let's get clarity on exactly what the practice standard is around this protocol. My understanding is it is different than what you're doing. And I need it to, from my perspective, I need it to be met to feel safe working here. So, and it's part of what we've all agreed to from my perspective. So I could be wrong. And if so, I want to be clear and I want to understand better. If I'm not, then I think there'll be, a choice that has to be made as to whether you could feel comfortable, continuing to work in a place where the standard is one place, but the reality is a different one. So again, it's not our place to fire, right? Typically, we're not going to be the one hiring or firing.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that we couldn't say, I want to be able to work this out here. And basically what we're saying is, if we can't, and we substantiate that the protocol is here, the standards here, and not being met, then I would need to have a discussion with our management and leadership team to see, what are the options. Basically, you're saying someone's going to have to know, that you're refusing. But I just don't want it to be a threat. I want us to say, I get it. I get that in your opinion, it isn't necessary, and that you're doing everything that you feel you've been told to do. So I get it. And I don't see it that way. So, I'd like to get clarity on it, and I'm going to I think I'll have a conversation to clear up, if I'm understanding this right. And then you have to go beyond and do that.
Okay, that's great. Thank you so much, Catherine.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Catherine, for providing guidance to our members on how to address infection control issues that may come up in the workplace. To our CDHA members, a reminder to watch the introductory video, Developing Your Mindset, of this video series, which provides a framework for having challenging conversations. Remember to follow your provincial regulatory body guidelines so you're not putting your health, your families, or your clients at risk.